to China in the world in recent years. Both of those distinguished speakers were from the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party in Taiwan. And we thought it was a good idea to have a session in which some of those topics were discussed by people from the opposition party in Taiwan, the KMT. And we have a very distinguished panel today. And I thank Andy Nathan for helping set this up. And I thank one of my former students, Will Thompson, for helping set this up as well. And today we have, speaking about these issues, cross-strait relations and U.S.-Taiwan relations, we have Dr. Alexander Huang, who is the KMT Director of International Affairs. He's also an associate professor of strategic studies at Tom Kong University. I've known Alexander for so long that if I said, we would both look old. So I will not discuss how long I've known Alexander. He's widely known in the United States as a leading expert on East Asian security affairs, on cross-strait relations and security affairs, and on U.S.-Taiwan relations. We also have today Mr. Eric Huang. Mr. Eric Huang is the director of the KMT office in Washington. This is a very important role that a lot of Americans don't know about, that Taiwan has its representative office in Washington, but it also has representative offices for the major parties. And Mr. Huang represents the KMT in Washington. That provides very good information to the Congress and to the executive branch about thinking in Taiwan, and so that the United States government is much more knowledgeable about trends in Taiwan. And we also are just very honored to have Mr. Johnny Jiang here, and he is the former party chairman of the KMT. And unlike many of our guests, he is an elected official. He is a member of the Taiwan Parliament, a legislature from Taichung. And not many of our speakers have been elected, and not many of our speakers could get elected. So congratulations to you. And it's a great honor. So this is a topic of great importance to me and to our initial commentator, who's my advisor when I was in grad school at Columbia, Andrew Nathan, who's the class of 1919 professor of political science here at Columbia. And I learned a lot of this from Andy Nathan when I was a graduate student. And then I studied this as a scholar, and I became an official in Washington, and this was my area of responsibility. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia in the East Asian and Pacific Affairs Bureau of the State Department. And I wrestled with these issues of cross-strait relations and U.S. policy towards cross-strait relations, and I tried to portray it in that fashion because it's a very complicated set of factors that are at work, and it's of critical importance to U.S. policy in East Asia. So without further ado, I'm going to allow the speakers to speak for a little while each, and then Andy will make some comments after they've spoken, and I will ask some questions as well. And then we'll open it up to questions. Please don't use the chat function if you're in the audience. Please use the Q&A function to write out your questions, and we'll address the questions after the panelists have spoken. And I'll do it in the order of my introduction, and I will first ask Dr. Alexander Huang, my old friend, to speak first.
Thank you, Tom, and I greatly appreciate this opportunity to speak at your forum and to engage in discussion with the wider audience. And specifically, thank you for the opportunity, and big thanks to Andy Nathan to provide this opportunity. Given the interest of time, because for professors, I used to say that we need to speak for 3 hours to get paid. But today I'm given the first 10 minutes to give you a highlight, and I'm pretty much looking forward to, discussions. Let me say this, the KMT's assessment of the current situation. Of course, number one is the great power competition. We see, potential crisis over Ukraine. We see that at least for 3-4 years that China is taking advantage of its rapid development and started to move more and more beyond its borderlines. And given this trends, I believe that it is crucial for not only Taiwan, but the region to maintain the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The KMT's view is that Taiwan, of course, sided with democratic community. Taiwan is a full-fledged democracy. Taiwan has a long history in terms of strategic and cultural linkage with the United States. However, Taiwan also needs to mitigate threat and prevent crisis for ourselves and for our neighbors in the region, which means that we need to be able to deal with potential problems. One of the problems that for the past 6 years is that we do not have any communication, government-to-government communication with the mainland side. Sometimes when there is a strong competition, there is a sharp difference between democracy and dictatorship, or a conflicting values across the Taiwan Strait. It is easy to think that we will only take the confrontational side, but forget about the cooperation side. Our relations with the mainland is not as complicated as the United States and China. Secretary Blinken said that you have threefold relationship. You have competition, you have cooperation, and you have adversarial relationship. In the past 6 years, we see that Taiwan is moving toward more and more confrontational approach vis-a-vis the mainland China without crisis prevention mechanism, without official communication. That's the area that we believe that is especially crucial for every one of us in the next few years, that we see, if we all agree that our shared interest is peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, we believe that we are a strong candidate to maintain such peace and stability in the next few years. As we all know that, Xi Jinping is getting into his third term from 2022 to 2027. And 2027 is also the centennial of the People's Liberation Army. We are about 3 years away from the 10th year mark of Xi Jinping's military reform. So for the next few years, it's going to be crucial for everyone, especially for Taiwan. Now, let me move on to the wider range of the region. We all understand that the Indo-PACOM in Hawaii had promoted and successfully secured the first year budget support from the Congress on this PDI, or Pacific Deterrence Initiative. We understand that, we may not agree with Xi Jinping in his assessment of East is rising, West is declining. But in the Indo-Pacific region, I believe, or we believe in the KMT, that we need to buy time, both in the United States and in Taiwan. For the United States, the PDI or the modernization of the platforms, replacement of the obsolete systems, introducing the new operational concept, and introduce new high technology into the future warfare. The United States needs time beyond Build Back Better, beyond we get our act together to strengthen and for a healthier democracy. Taiwan also needs time. From the very last year, of Obama administration through the Trump administration until 2 days ago, all the arms sales, items that have been approved by the Congress and needs time to get it done and ship it to Taiwan. And we will need time to do the reorganization of our command structure to the battalion level. We need to exercise, we need to train them. So Taiwan also needs time, even if we wanted to move to a asymmetric centered, defense operations. So for the next few years is more crucial than ever that we believe that we need a certain communication on the other side. The KMT will not talk about political resolution across the Taiwan Strait. The KMT will not talk about unification with Beijing. The KMT wanted to maintain the low bar is a crisis prevention telephone communication line. The high bar is to resume people-to-people communication and travel after a certain control of the pandemic. We believe that a stronger people-to-people exchange, given the fact that China is our largest trading partner, our trade with China and Hong Kong consists beyond 42% of our total trade. That's the reality, and a government needs to have the channel, needs the ability to protect our citizens around the world, especially investors on mainland China. So more likely that if we have a chance to return to power, we believe that we will be in a better position to promote functional, issue-based people-to-people communication. And also, we would like to resume official dialogue at the level, at least, that when there is a potential crisis or a potential for unintended incident, that we can have a communication line. We are part of the Democratic Alliance. We continue to forge our relationship with the United States. So in conclusion, I would say the KMT's approach to our relationship with the United States and with the mainland is that we are not pro-US or pro-China. We understand that to be a full-fledged democracy, we have to deal with both Washington and Beijing to protect our national interests. The approach and the strategy is clear that we will continue to raise our capacity and capability to defend democracy, to defend militarily the Taiwan and Penghu area. On the other hand, we try to reduce the threat and mitigate the crisis or the conflict. So we think we do both. We are in the better position to provide another alternative choice for Taiwan electorate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And I would like to turn to the next speaker on the schedule, who is Mr. Eric Huang, but I'm not seeing his picture any longer. I think he's having some difficulty with connectivity, and we'll try to bring him back. So in the meantime, I will just skip to the third scheduled speaker, who is Mr. Johnny Jiang. And Mr. Jiang, if you don't mind, maybe you could go before Mr. Huang, and he can speak after you.
Okay. So which means I can get more 5 minutes. All right. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you, Thomas, and Andy, and a lot of people working on this today's project. especially the China World Program and the Whitehead East Asia Institute from the Columbia University. I'm very honored to speak at this webinar, especially as the former committee chairman and the current Republic of China legislator. I believe this type of exchange and conference greatly contribute to Taipei-Washington relations, allowing us to achieve greater mutual understanding and establish a stable foundation for the future context. To the point, the main focus of my speech following today, I will revolve around resolving cross-strait dispute by emphasize people-to-people connection, which actually mentioned by Alexander before. And I will try to conclude by investigating several ways to achieve the goal of maintaining cross-strait peace and stability. First of all, I think I have to argue that the stability of cross-strait relationships affects not only the stability of the Asia-Pacific region. This stability is also a key link in the strategic security of the entire world. And the U.S. approach and attitudes from 1949 will into the future have been and will be of the utmost importance. And looking at the recent change in international system and at the dynamics of Washington-Beijing relations, I will argue first, Washington-Beijing relationships are moving towards stability after Biden's Xi Jinping video conference last November. And second, I will argue cross-strait relations are trending toward fluctuation. And why Washington-Beijing moving towards stability? I think, especially carefully watching the Biden-Xi Jinping conference last November, I conclude that the relations between the two superpowers will be competitive, but both sides will establish guidelines in order to prevent competition from descending into conflict. So from this perspective, I believe that under Biden administration, relations between Washington and Beijing will be led of a steadier controlled competition. But for the cross-strait relations, I think it's trending toward fluctuations. Despite the U.S.-China relations is getting, steady, but the question of Taiwan remains a latent fuse that may potentially initiate conflict. Especially a lot of Western think tanks, media have discussed these potentialities, with the most provocative being the economist magazines labeling the island of Taiwan as the most dangerous place on earth. In order to avert this potential for conflict and preserve the present and steady relationship between Taipei and Beijing has become critical. But this critical relationship has been quite chilly in the past few years, especially a lot of arguments recently say that approximately 2027 is the very critical timing. Some even argues, such as the U.S. former Indo-Pacific Naval Commander Davidson. He also said that 2027 would be around the time that the CCP would resort to military forces against Taiwan. Furthermore, the CCP has repeatedly recently used the phrase New Age Plan for the party to comprehensively resolve the Taiwan question. 新时代党解决台湾问题的总体方案. I think this phrase will likely appear in the program for the CCP's 20th National Congress. and possibly guide Beijing's primary plan for action against Taiwan. With this in mind, I believe that cross-strait relations will trend toward fluctuation in the next few years. So which, if left unchecked, will ultimately and inevitably destabilize Washington-Beijing relations. So how Taiwan with the situation? I think basically in Taiwan right now, there are two paths in the face of cross-strait relations. One is holding by DPP, the other is argued by the KMT. For the DPP, I would say that if you guys look at the last October, President Tsai Ing-wen wrote an article in Foreign Affairs magazines that she said she isn't pursuing Taiwan independence, doesn't wish for military conflict, and hope for peace, stability, and mutual coexistence with the CCP. Basically, I think this article layers very clearly that the DPP's national security strategy, that is playing the democracy versus authoritarian's card and relying on the democratic world to rescue Taiwan. This is very, a style of covert thinking, of differentiating systems and nations by layered forms of government, but fails to take into account geopolitical realities. So I believe that instead of relying on outside help for our survival, Taipei's role should be that of a responsible friend to Washington, with the responsibilities of reducing tension and helping both sides to avert crisis. So that's why I think we need to talk about the value of the KMT position, which actually some mentioned by the Alexander. For the KMT, we must also look at the domestic side or internal side of the mainland Chinese. The national security or the cross-strait relationship actually not just influenced by the international system and not just influenced by the leader of the different governments, not just by the leaders across the Taiwan Strait, but also influenced by the society across the Taiwan Straits. So for the KMT, I think we must also try to eliminate the recent, discussion of invocation via military force and the hostility that a mainlander feels toward Taiwan. Actually, the KMT had already accomplished this goal in the past, and I think we will accomplish them again in the future, and last alleviate cross-strait tensions from a people-to-people level. On the other hand, the DPP seems incapable of doing so far, whether because of ideological or other hindrance. And I think although the KMT seeks to alleviate tensions in the Strait, this does not signify or even imply that we seek to defer to Beijing's authority. Just because we seek dialogue in order to work toward peace does not make us pro-Beijing. Our priority remains the sovereignty and independence of the Republic of China. For example, we unequivocally oppose Beijing's so-called one country, two systems. The unfortunate reality remains that they are our neighbors, whether we like it or not, and we must learn to live with them, especially since we know that entirely relying on other countries cannot solve the issue across the Taiwan Strait. To sum up, the DPP approaches the cross-strait question only from the international level. The KMT considers this level too, but we think also from the people-to-people level in order to achieve regional peace. So in conclusion, I try to provide some, approach that which could be considered to resolving the cross-strait disputes by emphasizing people-to-people connections. Under the circumstances, I support for resolving cross-strait dispute by emphasizing people-to-people connection. Therefore, I try to advocate a people's peace theory to replace democratic peace theory for Taiwan Strait. With this theory, we seek to utilize one of the most intrinsic value or inherent value in Chinese thought, that is the people as priority. In Chinese, we call 民本思想. This is, the 民本 versus 民主. We know at this moment it's very difficult to transform the CCP or communist political system in a very short time into the Western democracy. But still, we need to solve the cross-strait dispute. So how to lay out the basis for this kind of cooperation, dialogues, or exchange, I think is very important. So go back to the fundamental thought in Chinese wisdom, that is, I call the 民本思想, which put the people as priority. This people-to-people approach will provide a voice for safeguarding the security, assets, livelihood, or other fundamental rights of Taiwan people who have ventured onto mainland China to make their living. This approach will promote protection of fundamental rights of mainland Chinese students, mainland Chinese spouses of Taiwanese. This approach will proudly display the human rights values we enjoy on Taiwan. By emphasizing people-to-people connections, we will support all peoples on both sides of the strait, thereby eliminating spiraling cross-strait hostilities and transforming both sides' perception of cross-strait relations. In other words, the goal is to begin rebuilding cross-strait peace by starting from our two currently separated societies. Taiwan is absolutely not the world's powder keg, nor is Taiwan a strategic burden. Taiwan should instead be the world's dove or peacemaker, an asset for peace. Approaching matters from the perspective of the people serves the interest of both Washington and Taipei by transforming Taipei into the responsible friend that we should and can be. This is the route, and I believe that the KMT should pursue. We should work towards turning Taipei into cornerstone for world peace. We should work towards even more stable long-term working relationship between the two sides of the strait and between Taipei and Washington. We should become the trusted channels through which both Washington and Beijing seek to cool tensions when their relations run hot. Taipei should be the so-called guardrail mentioned in the Biden-Xi Jinping conference, protecting Washington-Beijing competition from descending into conflict. In order to set up this guardrail, I believe that the party-to-party political dialogue or party-to-party diplomacy will be a crucial mechanism or medium of communication. In the past, the KMT conducted dialogue with the CCP by means of KMT-CCP Forum. In the future, I believe that KMT will also be able to similarly establish forums for dialogue with the Democratic or Republican parties in the US. I also believe that by means of double, bilateral, or even trilateral formal or informal talks, by means of getting political party leaders, members of Congress, and expert scholars together, we will be able to break through unproductive enmities and hostilities. Although pre-existing structures and frameworks may seem inflexible, individual people are flexible. Together, we can be even more flexible when dealing with Washington, Taipei, Beijing relationships. Together, we can plot the course toward toward lasting peace. So basically, I think that's my conclusion. And I try to provide some thoughts for you guys to discuss. I think I just end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnny Jiang. I really appreciate your comments and your introduction of a new concept. And we have Mr. Eric Huang with us as our third speaker. He's having great difficulty with connectivity with his computer system where he is. So he's going to try to speak to us without his video because video takes a lot of bandwidth, although I think we just lost him altogether. If we can't get him on, I might turn to Professor Nathan to maybe raise a couple of issues with our first two speakers. Mr. Eric Huang has been making heroic efforts to stay connected to us, and I really do appreciate his efforts. But it seems like it's not working at present. So maybe I'll turn to Andy Nathan, Professor Andy Nathan, to start a discussion with the speakers. And when Mr. Huang is able to come back, we will have Mr. Huang, who again is the KMT office director in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, we have a great audience. I see a good turnout. So it just shows that our people here are very anxious to hear the KMT view. What I'd like to ask one of you to just explain a little bit how your policy differs from that of the DPP, because Johnny, I heard you say, maybe you could just correct me. I heard you say that the KMT stands for something like you said for the autonomy of the ROC. What was your exact phrase? I wanted to jot it down, but I lost it. Your position is for democracy in Taiwan and for the defense of the sovereignty of the ROC. Is that right?
Yeah.
Did I get
yes,
it? Okay.
You say, yeah.
All right. And you want people-to-people practical talks with the mainland. Isn't that the same position as the DPP? How is your position different?
I think the people-to-people, connection or people-to-people, relationship should be the very fundamental thinkings for both sides of the government. But based on this thought, then what would be the critical, the concrete actions that the government will take? I think is also very important. And so far, especially after the 2016, when the DPP government took the office, I think the feeling across the feeling of people across the town street, I think it's getting chilly and cold. So even a lot of people from mainland China and Taiwan, they begin to, hate each other. So we see the so-called 恶意螺旋, the spiraling vicious hatred across the street. That in some things also will push the government of both sides to take harsh actions against each other, and sometimes to justify their position, not establish the dialogues. I think this is also not the U.S. want to see. The U.S. government always say they would like to see both sides of Taiwan Strait starting dialogue and solve the Taiwan question or cross-strait issue peacefully. So the people-to-people relationship, the people-to-people connections, I think that is to kind of rebuild the trust across the Taiwan Straits. But then is how the government take the actions to encourage or to really have the actions make the dialogue happen. I think that depending on the different parties' position and different governments that they will try to do or not, or how much they can do, or how active, how proactive they will try to make this happen.
Thank you, Mr. John. Andy, I have Eric Huang back on. I can see his name. I can't see his face because of the bandwidth issue. Maybe we can try to have him give his comments, and I'll turn it back over to you for another question. How about that, Andy? Okay, Mr. Huang, if you can hear us and you can unmute yourself, maybe we can hear your comments, even if we can't see your image.
I'm not sure whether Eric can hear from you either, because we are in different locations. But let me chime in briefly for a few minutes to talk about KMT's reestablishment of our representative office in Washington, D.C. I think this is by its own act through setting up an office in the United States is a goodwill and a firm intention for us to engage in communication, conversation with the people in the policy realm. We wanted to introduce our views better, and we will have our permanent staff stationed in Washington, D.C. and travel to different cities throughout this year. And I'm sure that another function of our representative office in Washington, D.C. is to plan and host the travel delegations. It is the current policy that starting from 2022, we will have various delegations led by what we call the chairman's envoy to visit the United States based on topic issues. There will be a delegation focused on supply chain and high technology. The second one will be focused on trade and economic development in Taiwan and in the Indo-Pacific region. A third one would be on defense. Actually, working with my department, we have formed an ad hoc what we call DDG, the Defense Dialogue Group, working with my department. The group consists with 6 to 8 senior policy makers before, and also retired admirals and generals, that we are ready to re-engage in the dialogue with Pentagon and with the defense policy community in the United States as well. Of course, before all these, we are working very hard and plan Chairman Eric Chu's personal trip to the United States. We hope that the pandemic situation will be eased, after 6 to 8 weeks, and we are gear up in those plannings. And I hope to see you in person in the United States as well. I would give more time for the audience and for Andy and for Tom to get into more interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alexander. I'm sorry that Eric Huang is having so much difficulty, but I appreciate you saying that. I just add to what you say that I don't know, when I was in the U.S. government, I always found it very useful to talk to the representatives of the party offices of our Taiwan friends. And I see that in the Q&A, there's Mike Fonte from the DPP has joined us today. And I used to interact with him as well as with the KMT office directors. And it's just very useful for Americans to hear different viewpoints and have as much knowledge of Taiwan as we can as we approach some of these real challenges. So I appreciate the efforts of Mr. Eric Huang and the way that you represented it, Alexander. Andy, I think I've been looking at some of the Q&A questions, and I wanted to ask one myself, if that's okay, based on a few of them, try to put them together, and it'll take me a moment to put them together. And some of it struck me before. The notion is that the current administration in Taipei is unable to have contacts, constructive contacts with the mainland, with the PRC. And it's certainly the case that there aren't contacts, but couldn't it be said that the real reason that there are no contacts is not the Tsai administration, but the PRC itself, that the PRC refuses to speak with the Tsai administration? And the pretext for that refusal seems to be that President Tsai has never accepted the so-called 1992 consensus, this concept that was pushed in Taiwan by previous KMT governments and by one of my teachers, Professor Su Chi, who helped create this concept, that she doesn't accept this concept. And one of the reasons she doesn't accept this concept is she, like many scholars, thinks that there never really was a 1992 consensus, in the sense that both sides of the strait in their respective facts transmissions said that there was one China, but the Taiwan side said that it was one China respective interpretations, and the mainland just said it's one China. And I believe it was Bonnie Glaser in the question list, one of our friends and a speaker in our series more than once, raised the question, if the mainland's unwilling to say respective interpretations, and as Mr. Johnny Jiang said, the KMT is devoted to preserving the sovereignty of the Republic of China, isn't there a danger that you will be accepting that Taiwan is part of the PRC if you do not get the mainland to say that the basis of any cross-strait contact would be one in which respective interpretations was honored? In other words, you would have to, in essence, concede the entire political difference across the strait before you could even talk. And would that be worth it? And I guess that's the question that I have. It's related to the 92 consensus. It's related to the notion that the KMT wants to preserve the sovereignty of the Republic of China. And it's related to this notion that the PRC, from all signs, seems to have a very rigid and stubborn view of cross-strait relations, that there's one China, but they won't say that Republic of China is a legitimate a political entity within that one China. And President Xi in 2019 in January made a very assertive speech saying that the only acceptable outcome is unification, and the only acceptable form of unification is one country, two systems, which both the KMT and the DPP seem to reject. So it gets back to the beginning of my question. Isn't this really all on Beijing? Is it really the fault of the Tsai administration that there isn't contact across the Taiwan Strait? And can you fix that problem without actually surrendering, in a sense, as Andy Nathan said earlier in the comments before we started, without surrendering to the mainland before you can actually have the contacts that Mr. Zhang laid out in his excellent talk?
Yeah, let me quickly respond to this. This is a complicated, but it's a long-term question, an old question that we all know, and we spend years and debating and discuss about this. Let me make a few points. Number one, we need to ask ourselves that do we want a quick, final, terminal resolve of the cross-strait political differences anytime soon? Are we pursuing that? Do we want to end the game sooner than later? The situation is quite different from the time when President Ma Ying-jeou was in power, when Hu Jintao was in power. We all know that there is a strategic competition between the United States and China. We all know that Xi Jinping is a different person and different leadership and different decision style. So Xi Jinping, with or without 92 consensus, we might say that he is pretty much committed that he will do it his way. And if Taiwan, if President Tsai agrees with that there was a so-called consensus, would how much trust, how many years that would need to bring to a possible direct official dialogue? That's issue number one. And issue number two is that this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Hong Kong dialogue in 1992. And we all know that the reality was that there was no conclusion when both sides met in Hong Kong in late October and early November 1992. But it was 2 weeks later, on November 16th, that there was a kind of creative, agreement or understanding, I should say, precisely, understanding that when both sides deal with the functional issues, that one China, the definition of one China, could not be mentioned, mentioned, or it could be expressed by words rather than in writing. The issue now back is that whether 92 consensus, whatever it called, the 4 Chinese characters, lost its value to maintain, to stabilize the Taiwan Strait. If we say that, if we agreed upon a Beijing-defined 92 consensus, then that's surrendering. I don't think it's a give up of our sovereignty or a surrender Taiwan into the People's Republic. Of course, Xi Jinping wanted to do that. He wants to end the game. But for Taiwan, we wanted to do everything to prevent from, Beijing to take that way. So for KMT, in short, we still consider the 4 characters, the 92 consensus, is a useful tool to mitigate, to reduce the tension without surrendering, to re-engage, reopen people to people and official dialogue in terms of helping our investors and business community that are living and working there on one hand, and also lower the tension across the Taiwan Strait, even KMT returned to power, even KMT said the words 92 consensus. I believe that the PLA Air Force will continue to fly sorties in the area that's southwest to the Taiwan's ADIZ. We understand that perfectly. But KMT strongly opposed the idea of Taiwan independence. The KMT will not do anything to do so-called desynchronization. The KMT will not antagonize Beijing to its nerves that heighten the tension. The KMT will help that to reverse the heightened hostilities among the people. We believe that we will never ever accept a one-party dictatorship. We will never accept a Beijing-defined one China. But we do not see the people on the mainland as our enemies. I think the KMT will do our effort to make sure to help that, to ease the tension, to make sure that the people on both sides will not see each other as arch enemy. I think it is especially important, as I said in my first presentation, that the time is critical. Both the United States and Taiwan needs a better status quo, a better peace and stability. And we both need that, and we know that. So this is our message to our friends in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a long question because I combined about 5 questions from the Q&A slot, and I hope I did justice to those people who asked that question, but I thought it might be useful to combine them. I'm going to let Andy take over here and ask a question, and if Mr. Huang is able to participate, Eric Huang, in the conversation, that would be great. You'd have to unmute and let us know that you can, but I'm going to turn it over to Andy right now. Go ahead, Andy.
Let me follow up on what Alexander just said. So you said it's no longer the time of Hu Jintao. It's now the time of Xi Jinping. And Johnny said Xi Jinping has announced that in the Xin Shiqi, he wants to,彻底解决 Taiwan Wenti. So, and what I hear you saying, Alexander, is you want to postpone the status quo. Xi Jinping wants to settle it quickly. You want to drag it out. You want to kick the can down the road. You seem to believe that if you display a friendly people-to-people face to the mainland, that the mainland brothers are not your enemies. This will calm down Xi Jinping. It will soften his resolution to solve the Taiwan question in the near future. I just want to check, is that your strategy, that showing friendship will, as it were, reverse Xi Jinping back to the Hu Jintao era of patience?
I believe that Xi Jinping will never be Hu Jintao. And the economic and the military might are much stronger in Xi Jinping's toolbox, and especially for his mindset. Xi Jinping probably have a self-confidence that beyond our understanding. My point is that we do not seek a final resolution of the political differences anytime soon. We want to maintain a better and more stable status quo. We believe that stop antagonizing China on the daily basis and continue to remind, daily to the mainland people as well that Taiwan is walking away. I think, Taiwan needs to be smart. We understand the threat. We understand that Xi Jinping is not going to change his mind. We do not want to change his mind. Well, but we need to do ourselves a service to lower the tension. Because Taiwan's survival and sustainable development requires a lot of efforts. It's not trying to verbally, to present, our view. KMT is the party, the only party that had the experience to pound the table and argue against our Beijing counterpart. I can testify that before the Ma Ying-jeou Xi Jinping summit in Singapore, we argue against each other. We even threatened to walk away, and Ma Ying-jeou threatened not to board the plane to fly to Singapore. We argue until the day, until 2:30 a.m. On the date, before Ma Ying-jeou took off from Taipei. KMT, we are not the party that trying to antagonize China or show our different view through keyboards and news release. We are the people that we told them that we disagree to their face. And I think that kind of engagement is required. We need to keep the communication line open. This is not surrendering to China or agree, or the KMT assume that that Xi Jinping will be the king forever. The Chinese history does not provide that evidence that a leader will be immortal. What we believe that Taiwan staying in a democratic camp, the survival of the Republic of China will be a not only a must for Taiwan people, but an example for the future political possibilities in China in the long run. So we do not seek a sudden or quick solution. Why do we need to end the game right now? Why do we need to buy Xi Jinping's formula now? We tried very hard to survive. We will try to prevent the crisis, lower the threat, and I believe it is a policy that needs specifically for the next few years for Taiwan and for the United States and for our neighbors.
We have a lot of great questions in the Q&A. I have more thoughts, but maybe we should go to those.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I saw one which is a little different from some of the other questions, and it had to do with the role of countries other than the United States. And I haven't heard a lot from the speakers so far about the role of the United States and what you would prefer the United States to do or not do in its policy towards cross-strait relations and toward Taiwan. And this question touches upon the question of Japan, because the United States-Japan alliance is a strong bulwark for the U.S. presence in East Asia, and the U.S. has been the biggest supporter of Taiwan's security going back to 1949. And Japan seems like it has become, at least in its statements, a little bit more proactive in its expressed concerns about cross-strait stability and peace, and more proactive in its support for Taiwan as a fellow democracy. And of course, the U.S.-Japan alliance is an important part of any kind of U.S. military response to any kind of conflict across the Taiwan Strait. So what do you view as, what is the KMT position on the proper role of the U.S.-Japan alliance and of Japan in Taiwan security? And if I could take the opportunity to tie on to this, because you, especially Alexander Huang, are an expert on this. I mean, I just don't know any anybody who's a bigger expert on cross-strait military affairs and deterrence across the Taiwan Strait. And I know that Mr. Johnny Jiang is on the military committees in the legislature, so you must wrestle with this. What is the role of the United States in this? What is the role of the U.S.-Japan alliance? And what is the role of Taiwan's future military planning in helping protect what Mr. Johnny Jiang has said, protect the sovereignty of the Republic of China against incursions from the PRC?
And do you have a criticism of Tsai Ing-wen's, what's it called, overall defense concept?
Johnny, you want to go first, or I can.
You go first.
Okay. From the outset, I want to say that there are some critical messages that we will bring to a closed door, not closed door with the U.S. government only, but closed door discussions with people like you. And I would not, talk too much in an open forum. That we do have a plan. What I can share is that probably, I hope that we will, follow up with what we have done with Johnny when he was the chairman of the party. We continue the effort, and I can happily report to Johnny that we hope by the end of this month we will have the KMT version of National Security Strategy Guidance, finalized, and in that we will be an open message. We will make the both Chinese and English version, and we will bring that to the United States. And to respond to the military issue, we do have our own view. We believe that the United States can do several things. Number one, the United States can encourage the Japanese government to engage in quiet and more effective and more courageous move in terms of conducting meaningful dialogue on defense issues with Taiwan. I believe that Tokyo needs your encouragement more. Secondly, I think the United States can open its heart for, at least for us, to present that our view for the ODC, or overall defense concept. We studied a lot. I wrote a book chapter. It will be published by the United States National Defense University in the spring on the overall defense concept. We support the overall defense concept. We believe that we should we should choose that approach. And we believe that the United States can bring more ears to hear, what Taiwan's version of improving the ODC, how to make it more, kind of implant into the current Taiwan's operational apparatus and command structures. Now, we believe that we should have a better but quiet and wider exchanges. In the past, we exchanged views by sending our delegation or our man to the United States. We believe that we should be able to, through smart arrangement, that we could see that the United States can bring its skill and policy interpretation to a wider Taiwan audience. There are, clear items. We list them already, and we will be very seriously, and we will come to you and present to you. And finally, I want to say KMT supports the ODC. We have some new ideas to how to improve it, how to implement them in Taiwan collaboratively with the United States, that within the acceptable and affordable budget that Taiwan can offer. And we are wide open for this kind of discussion. And we can also work closer to exchange our views and intels on our assessment of the growing PLA capability. I myself had, more than 50 students are continuing to watch the PLA on the daily basis. I believe if not because of the language barrier, you will find them valuable core of PLA researchers in Taiwan. And we are willing to bring the communities on both sides together. And I hope that one day that either they improve their English speaking, or we will have more Chinese speaking American friends and sitting together. I think that will be a much better collaboration between United States and Taiwan. We believe that on the defense part, we do have many issues to talk about it. We support the reserve and mobilization reform in a different way, and a more workable way, more acceptable way by the Taiwan youth. I testify in the LY. I do not believe that the DPP is taking a right approach to do it. Any quick fix or opening up and one more office would not address the real issue if we are talking about instant capability or imminent threat. So we buy time, give us 8 to 10 years. I guarantee you that our approach or formula can bring Taiwan a much better workable, functional reserve and mobilization system. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's interesting because I've said on this in this program or in this channel in the past that I was impressed that President Tsai really seemed to understand the military challenges that Taiwan faced and seemed to be adjusting strategy in a way that made sense given Taiwan's challenges from the mainland. And it's very interesting and gratifying to hear a member of the other party say the overall defense concept seems like basically a good idea. And so does seem it's unusual in Taiwan politics to have a consensus on almost anything. So to have a sort of a consensus.
If I may chime in, without really trying to antagonize all my friends in the DPP, if you come to Taiwan, I can tell you after Admiral Lee Shimin left office, the MMD is not talking about ODC at all. Trust me.
No. I understand there's a lot of politics within the Taiwan government on this issue, but it seems like at the top they understand it. At the top of the government, They understand it, and it seems like you agree with the basic concept, which is encouraging because personally I think it's a smart concept, and it's nice to see consensus on anything in Taiwan politics across the parties. And this gets at one of the questions in the queue, and this is a real political science question. And it has to do with electoral politics, and we have an elected official here. And it has to do with the nature of cross-strait relations in electoral politics in Taiwan. It's a very big topic in electoral politics in Taiwan. And I was, just as backdrop for this, I was in Taiwan in January 2019, and I was on the mainland just after it in January 2019. when President Xi made his speech on the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and the necessity, the prerequisite of progress on unification across the Taiwan Strait as a way of achieving that great rejuvenation, and his statements about one country, two systems and the 92 consensus. And it was impressive because before that speech, President Tsai was not very popular in Taiwan. Her popularity rating was below 20%. And that speech came out and it was very antagonizing to the Taiwan public. President Tsai's popularity rating went up by almost 20 points while we were there in our entourage, and continued to go up with the crackdown on pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. So my question is related to the 2024 election from a straightforward strategic point of view. You know, I'm not even a party member in the United States, let alone in Taiwan, so I'm not leaning in any direction. But if the mainland continues to pressure Taiwan, as you say, Alexander, with the military exercises and this demand for one country, two systems, very rigid approach to Taiwan, leading into the 2024 election, does the KMT have any kind of electoral hope of impressing on the Taiwan public that they have some kind of better approach to managing cross-strait relations that will not look like the KMT is too soft in its dealings with Taiwan, and therefore will not really have any hope in the cross-strait in the election, because if these old concepts of 1992 consensus and all the arguments that could be made about them are going to look very unpopular to the Taiwan public under those conditions. So it's related to a question that was asked in the Q&A. How do you see 2024, and how do you see cross-strait relations playing into the 2024 elections? And that's both for you, Alexander, and also for Mr. Jiang. And I don't know if Mr. Huang, Eric Huang, can chime in or not, but maybe we'll start with Mr. Jiang, Johnny Jiang, on this one, because Alexander answered the last one. Yeah.
All right, I think 2024 will be still a very challenging year for the KMT, especially on the cross-strait issues and mainland China policy side. Especially after the 2020 election, and before that, there was the speech by the Xi Jinping in 2019. You just mentioned. I think that's the very critical point that turning KMT's cross-strait policies into a kind of challenging side or downside. So that's why in the past 2 or 3 years, especially a lot of KMT supporters, even though we supporting so-called 92 consensus or one China with different respective interpretations, but we know the 92 consensus has been destroyed or on purpose by our political competitors or other parties. So how to make the cross-strait policy of the KMT much more acceptable to Taiwanese people? That would be the main job for the KMT right now. I think the KMT headquarters is also doing this right now. So hopefully by then, I think we may have the internal consensus to persuade the people of the Taiwan to accept that KMT's position or KMT's mainland China policies would be overall better for Taiwan, or overall better for the current cross-strait relationship. also would be also better for the Washington, Beijing, and Taipei relationship, because from the past until today, I mean, including the Washington, I think we all know that the complicated triangle relationship among Beijing, Washington, and Taipei, it's all about one China issue, or how can we solve one China issues among these very complicated cross-strait and triangle relationship. So from the Washington perspective, you have the so-called three communicates and TRA or plus 6 insurance to create a strategic environment, which actually is, we all know, try to create a strategic ambiguity environment for both Washington and Beijing. And for KMT, we know the cross-strait issues, you never escape from the one China issues. You have to deal with, you have to face these issues. Otherwise, you have to face the military conflict or military forces. So how to create the strategic ambiguity across the Taiwan Strait? I think that's have been done by the 92 consensus.
Yeah.
So indeed, we are doing the same thing. That is to create so-called strategic ambiguities to deal with this very complicated or lasting sovereignty problems across the Taiwan Strait. So right now for the KMT is how to persuade Taiwanese people that the KMT will protect our sea sovereignty and will protect Taiwan and will protect our lifestyles in Taiwan, that especially for our younger generation, that, we like this kind of lifestyle. We will never sacrifice our lifestyle, even though we support cross-strait dialogue. We support cross-strait exchange. We would like to solve the sovereignty issue across the strait peacefully, but we won't sacrifice, our values, our democratic values, our lifestyle. So that's why I think we will not be, so naive that, we don't need any military support, or we don't need to increase our military capabilities. So sufficient military capability is a requirement for credible deterrence to protect our democracy, to protect our lifestyle, to make Taiwan have the protection to talk with mainland China. I think we know this, but we have to tell people why we do this.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to have no choice but to go to war.
Right.
I think that from the Washington perspective, you are also trying to make the cross-strait relationship resolve peacefully. Yeah.
I think a war. I think it's fair to say a war would be disaster for everybody. There's no question about that. And I think for the mainland as well. That's something that.
Yeah. Tom, I have a short footnote to Johnny's remarks. We learned a devastating lesson, hard lesson, back in January 2019 when Xi Jinping made that speech. That was, the 40th anniversary of China's Taiwan policy. And our next election in 2024 will be in January. And the January 1st of 2024 would be the 45th anniversary of that, Taiwan policy remarks in 1979. So for KMT, in the summer, I'm going to host a war game to simulate what if, no matter how hard we campaign, no matter how hard we try to work with our young generation voters, 2 weeks or 10 days before our presidential election, if Xi Jinping decided to destroy KMT again by saying some nasty words, then it's going to be hard. So I am going to organize a simulation for that scenario, and so we can help our KMT politicians and people in public office to learn from the very beginning that what could be our better campaign strategy to prevent the damage that Xi Jinping may decided to do in January 2024.
It's a shimi junbei, right? It's a fascinating concept you have. If it's any comfort to your analysis, there was no such speech on the 35th anniversary of the letter to the compatriots. So maybe 40 is different than 45, but it's an interesting concept that it may happen again. There's something that's going around the United States discussions of these topics, and it's in the Q&A list, and I wanted to mention it to you. Is a lot of people are making connections between Russia's pressure on Ukraine and the mainland's pressure on Taiwan, and people have drawn all sorts of connections in their minds about how an invasion of Ukraine might favor the mainland over Taiwan or might not favor the mainland over Taiwan. And I wanted to know what the KMT analysis of this situation is. If President Putin orders an attack on Ukraine, is that a real danger for Taiwan's security? And how does it play out in the domestic politics of Taiwan? Would that crisis situation help the KMT, or would it help the DPP in domestic politics in Taiwan if there was the unfortunate outcome of a war between Russia and Ukraine through a Russian invasion?
I hope the Ukraine crisis or issue would be an issue of 2022 and not go beyond. I believe there is a positive angle and a negative one. The negative one has been discussed a lot by journal articles and TV talk shows about the similarities, or if there is a conflict in Eastern Europe, the United States can no longer afford to a major regional conflict around the world, so Taiwan will be endangered. But through my professional view, that 2022 is too important to Xi Jinping, and maintain stability at home is more important. Maintain economic stability and function is more important than attacking Taiwan or use force against Taiwan. At least I think he won't do anything stupid before the party Congress in the fall. That's the one side of the story. I think the other possible positive one is that for Taiwan people, not only DPP or KMT, but for Taiwan people to think twice that if we are in any way similar to a Ukraine situation, whether our fate will be determined by NATO versus Russia or by the Ukrainian citizen themselves. I think there will be a positive note for Taiwan citizens, for my students, to think, and I will try to remind them that we need to have a very vigilant view on our own interest, and it is, after all, that Taiwan needs to survive and to sustain. So how to protect our own national interest, how to do meaningful dialogue with powers, how to survive, how to protect our future generation and give them opportunity. I think this is the whole idea that we are working so hard. I think Johnny, me, and many others, we work for the future generation. We wanted to, before our retirement, we wanted to do everything possible to provide a peaceful and stable environment so they can continue with their dreams, and they can continue to think about their own future. So this is really from the bottom of our hearts that we do believe that in the next few years that Taiwan needs a better leadership, a better functional cabinet to help Taiwan sailing through these troubled waters.
Thank you very much. I wanted to let Mr. Eric Huang say something. I saw his hand go up, which means he's actually has enough connectivity to speak, and I wanted to give him a chance to speak, even if we can't see him. I'm really sorry for the difficulties, and I really appreciate your efforts, Mr. Huang, for staying online and being with us. Can you speak to us now?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
I apologize. One router later, so the hotel actually came in to change the router. I just want to very quickly answer to the Ukraine situation. I see there might be two impacts to the public in Taiwan. The first impact is, though I may be wrong here, but I don't think, given the situation of Russia having a military action towards Ukraine, I don't think America will respond militarily, which means I don't think Americans will risk their soldiers going in to prevent this. However, I do believe that economic actions will be taken. I think that economic sanctions will be taken. So there will be two impacts in this to Taiwan. First impact will be that people will view the Americans' failure to intervene militarily. The second impact will be, this is my belief, though I could be wrong, I think Xi Jinping will be happy to play ball with the Americans, and in this case, not play ball with the Americans, meaning they will not go along with economic sanctions of Americans towards Russians. So this will definitely have an impact on Taiwan's economy, especially with China. So these are two potential implications in the situation. Of course, we as peace lovers, we hope that everybody can maintain peace and stability, and we wish that the situation will be under the wrap here. But to answer your question directly, a very short form, I think if there is I think the situation across strait might even, so as a result, the party who can represent itself better manage the situation will win the voters' hearts and minds.
Thank you, Mr. Huang. I'll just say something. My own opinion on this issue is that a lot of people in the United States seem to think that Xi Jinping has a big would gain tremendously if Russia invaded Ukraine, and that it would help his ability to pressure Taiwan. I don't think it's that simple for the following reason. As a China specialist, I think a Russian invasion of Ukraine would, in a sense, be a disaster for Xi Jinping, in that I think the result would be, as you said, Eric, that the United States and the Europeans would level very heavy sanctions on Russia. I think that China would try to backfill some of that economic pain with some some extra economic cooperation with Russia. This would make look like an authoritarian bloc of Russia and China against the free world, which would lead to a greater division of international politics along those divides, along authoritarian and democratic divides. I think it would lead to more technological sanctions or limits or restrictions on trade with China, because it would look like an authoritarian bloc that needed to be countered because it was an aggressive authoritarian bloc. And I think it would be an embarrassment to the Biden administration, which I think would double down on its position in Asia, saying we can't afford to give in to any kind of authoritarian expansion in the future. So it would make if anything, a more resolute position on support for Taiwan's defense in Washington, which is not in Xi Jinping's interest either. So I don't see a lot of advantages for the PRC in Russian aggression, and I can't help but think that I thought of all of those outcomes, and that Chinese strategists on the mainland haven't also thought of those outcomes as the likely result of a Russian aggression. So I don't expect Beijing to try to criticize Putin or criticize what he's doing, but my guess is that they hope he doesn't actually carry out an invasion, because it will run against the interests of the PRC and dealing with both cross-strait relations and also with the United States, which is probably even more important to Beijing. But that's just my own opinion of the situation. But you see a lot of journalistic analogies between Ukraine and Taiwan, and this idea that anything that's bad for anything that the United States likes is good for the PRC, and therefore this would be good for the PRC. But I think the reality is more complicated than that. So that's my own view. It is 8:35. Andy, do you have any comments or questions to raise before we wind up? We have gone 90 minutes, and you can always tell it's a good meeting when, boy, the time is gone and you wish there was a lot more. And I really appreciate everything that's been said so far. Andy, I'll let you say something now.
Well, Alexander said that Chairman Drew is coming to visit the United States, and you're coming with him. So we welcome you and him, and Eric will be back in the U.S. by that time. So we hope we'll see the three of you. Maybe Johnny will be, I don't know who else in your delegation, to come in person. Maybe by that time the COVID will maybe be lightened up. Look forward to seeing you in person. Yeah, and you can come to the real capital of the United States, which is New York City, and you can visit us at Columbia University, and we would love to have you all. We could have a forum, and you could make your points here. Well, we really appreciate it. I'm really glad that Andy and Will Thompson, my former student, sort of pushed us in this direction of doing this kind of event, and I think it's been very constructive. And I apologize there was 27 questions, which is another sign of a very good event when you get so many good questions that you can't possibly answer them all. Really appreciate your time. I appreciate the fact that you're very busy. Mr. Johnny Jiang is an elected official, and he's on these committees. And Alexander Huang, a very busy guy, a great strategist, an old friend. And Mr. Huang, Eric Huang, you get the special prize tonight for your struggles to stay connected to us, and I appreciate it. Please don't apologize for it. It's technology, not effort, and we really appreciate you being here and making all those efforts to stay connected to us. Thanks to the audience. This is our first event for the spring semester. I think I said fall before. The spring semester, and we'll have several other events. Please join us, including the speakers today. You're always welcome to join China in the World events. We have speakers talking about topics in which you'd be interested, and we look forward to a good semester. Thanks to all. Good morning in Taipei. Good night in New York City.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
See
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
2021中天 乘风破浪，重大事件直播在线人数不断创新高。9月25日，国民党主席选举投开票为例，中天电视及中天新闻频道直播在线人数分别遥遥领先3个主要有台。若加总中天同时间的9个小直播，同时在线人数则高达85269人。再看10月23日罢免陈柏惟投票日，中天电视频道在线人数大幅领先3个主要有台频道，中天电视和中天新闻频道双开更碾压有台。若加总中天删 Q 的7个小直播，最高同时在线人数达到12.596人，再度狠超3个有台。转型到网络后的中天，仍专注做好新闻内容，获得广大网友肯定。有中天，有真相，重大事件看中天。